The quill trembled in Nathaniel Everhart's hand as he stood before the weathered oak table in the center of Millbrook's town square. The entire population of 300 souls pressed in around him like a living wall of judgment. The parchment before him bore words in both common and Orcish script, declaring an intention that would brand him outcast, heretic, or worse. But when he lifted his eyes to meet the fierce amber gaze of Grasha across the table, her green skin gleaming in the afternoon sun and her small tusks jutting proudly from her lower jaw, he knew with absolute certainty that no law written by frightened men could dictate the shape of his heart. The murmurs had started 3 months ago when Grasha first appeared at the edge of his wheat fields, wounded and half-starved, her left arm torn by what looked like bear claws. Nathaniel had been checking his irrigation channels when he heard the grunt of pain, followed by the crash of a body hitting the dirt near his property line. His first instinct had been to reach for the old sword he kept by the well, the one from his father's service in the border wars. But when he rounded the corner of his barn and saw her lying there, her breathing shallow and her eyes squeezed shut against agony, something in him shifted. She was not the monster the stories painted. She was a person in pain. He had carried her into the barn despite her weak protests, despite the way she tried to shove him away with her one good arm. She weighed more than he expected, her muscular frame dense and solid, but he managed to get her onto a bed of fresh hay in one of the empty stalls. When he returned with clean water and bandages, she was watching him with eyes that held more suspicion than gratitude. "Why?" she had rasped, her voice rough like gravel rolling in a riverbed. "Because you are bleeding to death in my field," Nathaniel said simply, kneeling beside her. "May I look at your arm?" She had not answered, but she did not pull away when he carefully peeled back the shredded leather of her sleeve. The wounds were deep, ragged, and already showing signs of infection. He worked in silence, cleaning and binding, while she stared at the barn's rafters, with jaw clenched so tight he worried she might crack her teeth. That first night, he brought her broth and bread. She ate like someone who expected the food to be poisoned, but was too hungry to care. He told her his name. She told him hers. The conversation ended there, but it was a beginning. The second day, when he came to check her wounds, she asked why he lived alone on such a large farm. He told her about the fever that had taken his parents 5 years ago, about the wife he had almost married who chose a merchant from the eastern towns instead, about the quiet life he had built from dawn chores and evening solitude. She listened without comment, but he thought he saw something soften in her expression. The third day she tried to leave. He found her in the pre-dawn darkness, stumbling across the yard with her arms still barely functional. She made it as far as the fence before her legs gave out. He caught her before she hit the ground. "Stubborn," he muttered, half carrying her back to the barn. "Cannot stay," she insisted, even as she leaned heavily against him. "Dangerous for you." "Let me worry about that," she essayed. Over the weeks that followed, her arm healed and her strength returned. She began to help with the farm work despite his protests, insisting that she would not be a useless burden. He learned that she had been part of a hunting party from the northern mountains, that they had been tracking a rogue bear that had killed 2 orc children, that the fight had scattered her companions and left her alone in unfamiliar territory. She learned that he had studied medicine for 2 years before his parents fell ill, that he preferred working with his hands to working with his mind, that he sang old ballads while he worked the fields and could not carry a tune to save his life. She laughed at his singing. It was the first time he heard the sound, rich and surprisingly musical, and something in his chest tightened at the joy in it. They fell into a rhythm. She would wake before dawn to help him feed the chickens and milk the cow, moving with efficiency and surprising gentleness. He would prepare breakfast while she checked the fences, and they would eat together in comfortable silence or easy conversation. The days grew warmer, and the wheat grew tall, and Nathaniel found himself watching the way sunlight caught in her dark hair, the way her tusks pressed against her lower lip when she concentrated, the graceful power in every movement she made. He did not name what he felt. He was not ready. But the town noticed her presence. Old Marcus, who delivered the mail once a week, saw her carrying water from the well and nearly dropped his bag in shock. The news spread like wildfire through Millbrook. Nathaniel Everhart was harboring an orc on his land. Nathaniel Everhart had lost his mind. Nathaniel Everhart was a traitor to his kind. The town council came on a humid morning in late summer, 5 stern-faced men in their formal coats, led by Councilman Richard Davison with his silver beard and cold eyes. Grasha had been in the fields, but she came running when she heard the horses. She positioned herself slightly behind Nathaniel but within reach, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. "Nathaniel," Davison began, his voice heavy with false concern. "We have heard troubling reports. We felt it our duty to investigate." "There is nothing to investigate," Nathaniel replied evenly. "I am running my farm as I always have, with the assistance of an orc." Davison's gaze flickered to Grasha with thinly veiled disgust. "Surely you understand how this appears. It appears that I helped someone who was injured and dying. It appears that I treated a living being with basic decency. If that troubles the council, then the council has deeper problems than my choice of farm help." One of the other councilmen, a rotund man named Bernard, spoke up. "The law is clear, Nathaniel. Orcs are not permitted within town boundaries except as prisoners or under armed escort. This creature should have been reported to the militia immediately." "This is my land," Nathaniel said, his voice hardening. "It lies outside the town boundaries. The law does not apply here. The spirit of the law can go to hell along with anyone who thinks injured. People should be left to die in the dirt." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Davison's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he found his voice again. "You are making a grave mistake, boy. The protection of the community depends on maintaining clear boundaries between human and orc. Our ancestors fought and died to establish those boundaries. My father fought in the border wars," Nathaniel said quietly. "He came home with scars and nightmares, and he told me before he died that the greatest tragedy of war is not the fighting but the forgetting that the enemy bleeds the same color red. I have not forgotten." Grasha's hand found his wrist, her fingers warm and collused. The touch was brief, but it steadied him. Davison looked between them, and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "I see. This is not merely about charity, then. This is about something far more foolish." He straightened in his saddle. "Hear me well, Nathaniel Everhart. If you persist in this madness, if you continue to shelter this creature, you will find yourself unwelcome in Millbrook. No merchant will trade with you. No neighbor will lend aid. You will stand alone. Then I will stand alone." They left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Grasha was silent for a long time after the dust of their departure settled. Finally, she turned to him, her expression carefully neutral. "I will go," she said. "Tonight, you have done enough, more than enough." "No, Nathaniel, no," he repeated, turning to face her fully. "I will not send you away because small-minded men are afraid of what they do not understand. Stay, please." Her amber eyes searched his face. "Why? Why risk everything for me?" "Because I love you," he thought. But the words stuck in his throat, too large and terrifying to speak aloud. "Instead," he said, "because it is right, because you are my friend, because this farm is too quiet without your terrible jokes and your insistence on reorganizing my toolshed." A smile tugged at her lips despite the gravity of the moment. "Your toolshed was chaos. It was organized chaos. There is no such thing." They stood there in the morning sun, and the world felt both impossibly large and perfectly small, just the two of them, against everything else. True to Davison's word, the isolation began immediately. When Nathaniel rode into town the following week to buy supplies, the general store owner refused to serve him. The blacksmith would not repair his broken plow blade. People crossed the street to avoid him, their faces hard with disapproval or pity or fear. He returned home with empty hands and a heavy heart. Grasha met him at the door, took one look at his face, and pulled him into an embrace without a word. He let himself lean into her strength, breathing in the scent of her earth and wood smoke, and something uniquely her own. When they pulled apart, her hands lingered on his shoulders. "We will manage," she said firmly. "I can hunt. We have the garden. The wheat will be ready for harvest soon, and we can trade with travelers on the road. This is not your burden to bear. You made it mine when you carried me bleeding into your barn." Her expression softened. "I choose to stay, Nathaniel, whatever comes." The harvest came in golden and abundant. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, cutting and bundling the wheat, their hands blistered and their backs aching. Grasha sang while she worked, old orcish songs with harsh consonants and haunting melodies. Nathaniel found himself humming along, learning the rhythms if not the words. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, they sat on the porch steps with mugs of cider. Grasha was teaching him words in her language, simple things like sky, earth, home. When she said the word for love, he repeated it carefully, trying to match her pronunciation. Grashuk, he said. She smiled. Close. Try again. Grashuk, Grashuk. Better, it means love, but also bond. Connection that goes beyond words. He looked at her, at the way the dying light painted her green skin in shades of bronze, at the strength and gentleness that lived together in her features. Teach me how to say I love you. Her expression shifted, surprise and hope and fear all warring in her eyes. Nathaniel, please, I want to know the words. She was quiet for a long moment, then softly, Zugrashukdor, he repeated, letting each syllable settle on his tongue. Then, in common, I love you, Grasha. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe from the moment you laughed at my singing. I know this complicates everything. I know it makes the isolation worse, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel. She stood abruptly, her mug clattering to the porch. For a terrible moment he thought she would run, but instead she turned back to him and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I am Orc, she said, her voice rough. You are human. Our peoples have been enemies for generations. There is no future for us, Nathaniel, no happy ending. I do not care about what our peoples have been. I care about what we are. He stood, closing the distance between them. Tell me you do not feel the same, and I will never speak of it again. Tell me, and I will bury this feeling so deep it will never trouble you. I cannot. The words came out barely above a whisper. I cannot tell you that, because it would be a lie. Zugrashukdor, Nathaniel. I love you until it terrifies me. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it. Her palm was rough against his, her fingers strong enough to crush stone but trembling now with vulnerability. Then we will find a way, together. She pulled him close, and their first kiss was tentative and fierce, all at once, her tusks brushing against his lips, her hand cupping the back of his head with infinite care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. The world will not accept this, she murmured. Then we will change the world. Her laugh was wet and shaky. Foolish human, stubborn orc. They stood wrapped in each other as the stars emerged overhead, and for that moment, nothing else mattered. But reality came crashing back soon enough. A week later, a group of young men from town rode out to the farm in the dead of night. Nathaniel woke to the sound of breaking glass and Grasha's shout of warning. They came with torches and clubs, 8 of them, led by Davison's son Marcus, a hot-headed youth with more pride than sense. Come out, Everhart, Marcus shouted. Send out the orc, and maybe we will leave your farm standing. Nathaniel grabbed his father's sword and met Grasha at the top of the stairs. She had her bow, an arrow already nocked. Her face was set in grim determination. Stay behind me, he said. Absolutely not. They went out together, Nathaniel with his blade raised and Grasha with her bow drawn. The young men faltered at the sight of them united, but Marcus pressed forward. You are a disgrace to your father's memory, he spat, betting a monster while good human women go unwed. What I do on my own land is none of your concern, Nathaniel replied, his voice deadly calm. Leave now, and I will not report this attack to the regional magistrate. The magistrate will not help you. No one will. Marcus gestured to his companions. Burn the barn. Maybe that will convince him. They rushed forward, and chaos erupted. Grasha's first arrow took the torch from the lead man's hand. The second embedded itself in the ground at Marcus's feet, a warning. Nathaniel met the first attacker with the flat of his blade, not trying to kill, but to disarm and disable. The fight was brief and brutal. These were farmers' sons and apprentices, not soldiers, and they were no match for an orc warrior and a man defending his home. Within minutes, 3 were on the ground groaning, 2 had fled, and Marcus stood with Nathaniel's sword at his throat while his remaining companions were pinned under Grasha's aim. Go, Nathaniel said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. Tell your father, tell the council, tell the whole damn town if anyone comes to my land with violence again, I will not be merciful. This is my home, and I will defend it. They fled, dragging their injured with them, and Nathaniel knew that this was only the beginning. The town would not forget. They would not forgive. But as Grasha checked him over for injuries, her hands gentle and her eyes fierce with protective love, he could not find it in himself to regret anything. The answer came to him 2 days later while reading through his father's old papers. There were laws about human-orc relations, yes, prohibitions on marriage, restrictions on cohabitation, mandates for segregation. But there were also older laws, from the time before the borders hardened, when humans and orcs occasionally traded and even allied. One law in particular caught his eye, the law of blood pact. It was an ancient statute, nearly forgotten, that allowed for formal bonding between individuals of different species in cases of life debt or extraordinary service. The bond, once witnessed and sealed, granted the same legal protections as marriage. It could not be dissolved by any authority lower than the king himself, and it superseded local prohibitions. The catch was that it had to be declared publicly, before witnesses, and signed by both parties in full knowledge of the consequences. Once the pact was made, both individuals would be bound by its terms, unable to abandon each other, unable to break the bond. It was, in essence, an unbreakable marriage. He brought the paper to Grasha that evening, spreading it on the kitchen table between them. She read slowly, her lips moving as she puzzled through the archaic phrasing, and when she looked up, her expression was unreadable. "You want to bind yourself to me? Permanently? I want to make it impossible for anyone to separate us. I want to stand before the town and declare my intention to spend my life with you. He stopped, taking her hand. "I want you to be my wife in the eyes of the law and the gods and everyone else, if you will have me." She was silent for a long time, her thumb tracing patterns on his palm. "This will make you a pariah. You will lose everything. I will lose nothing that matters. Grasha, I would rather have one day bound to you than a lifetime of empty comfort. Say yes, please." Her smile was tremulous and beautiful. "Yes, yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. Zu Grashukdor, he whispered back. They spent the next week preparing. Nathaniel copied the pact declaration onto fresh parchment in his best hand, making one version in common and one in Orcish. He sent word to the town council that he would be making a formal legal declaration in the square on the first day of autumn, and that he requested their presence as witnesses. He did not tell them what the declaration would be. Grasha crafted matching armbands from leather and steel, etched with symbols from both their cultures, the wheat sheaf of human harvest and the mountain peak of orc clans. On the inside of each, she carved their names intertwined. She worked late into the nights, her face intense with concentration, and when she finally showed him the finished pieces, his breath caught at their beauty. The night before the declaration, neither of them slept. They sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars wheel overhead. Grasha told him stories of her childhood in the mountains, of her mother who could break rocks with her bare hands, and her father who carved instruments from bone and played songs that made the wind dance. Nathaniel told her about his dreams of traveling, of seeing the ocean, of building something that would outlast him. "After this," he said quietly, "we could go anywhere, leave Millbrook behind, start fresh somewhere no one knows us." "No." Her voice was firm. "You love this land. Your parents are buried here. I will not let fear chase us from your home. We stay, we make them see, they may never see, then we make them learn to live with it." When dawn broke on the first day of autumn, they dressed in their finest clothes. Nathaniel wore his father's old formal coat, dark blue with silver buttons, and Grasha wore a dress she had sewn herself from green fabric that matched her skin, embroidered with white flowers. She looked magnificent and terrifying and utterly beautiful. They rode into town together on his old cart horse, their backs straight and their heads high. The square was already full, 300 people pressed together in a mass of curiosity and hostility. The council sat at a table in the center, Davison front and center with his face like a thundercloud. When Nathaniel and Grasha approached, the crowd's murmur rose to a roar. "Silence," Davison commanded, and the noise subsided to angry whispers. He fixed Nathaniel with a cold stare. "You requested witnesses for a legal declaration. Make it quickly, and then remove that creature from our town." Nathaniel stepped forward, Grasha at his side, and laid the parchment on the table. "I am here to invoke the law of blood pact, as established in the Treaty of Three Peaks in the year 847. This law, which remains on the books and has never been formally dissolved, allows for the bonding of individuals across species lines in recognition of life debt or extraordinary service. Davison's eyes narrowed. That law is obsolete. Obsolete is not the same as revoked. Unless you can show me documentation of its formal dissolution, it remains legally binding. Nathaniel's voice rang clear across the square. I, Nathaniel Everhart, do hereby declare my intention to enter a blood pact with Grasha of the Northern Peaks. She saved my harvest when I could not manage alone. She defended my land against those who would destroy it. She has proven herself worthy of honor and respect, and I choose to bind my life to hers. The crowd erupted in shouts of outrage, but Nathaniel continued, raising his voice over the din. This pact, once signed and witnessed, cannot be broken by any local authority. It grants Grasha all the rights and protections of a spouse under the law. It makes her a citizen of this township with all attendant privileges, and it declares to everyone here that I choose love over prejudice, hope over fear, and the future over the past. This is madness, Bernard shouted from the council table. We cannot allow this mockery. Can you stop it? Nathaniel challenged. Show me the law that supersedes the blood pact. Find me the statute that prohibits it. Or admit that you simply do not like it and have no legal grounds to interfere. Davison was on his feet, his face purple with rage. You would throw away your humanity for a monster. I would claim my humanity by choosing who I love, rather than letting you choose for me. Grasha stepped forward then, her voice carrying strong and clear. I am Grasha, daughter of Mara Stonebreaker and Korgoth of the Windsongs. I have lived among my own people and learned their ways. I have hunted the great bears and climbed the highest peaks. But I have never known peace until I came to this land, to this man who showed me kindness when he could have shown me death. I choose this bond freely, with full knowledge of what it means, and I swear before all of you that I will honor it until my last breath. She pulled the parchment toward her, dipped the quill in ink, and signed her name in both common and Orcish script. Then she looked at Nathaniel, and in her eyes was every promise they had made and every dream they shared. He took the quill and signed below her name, his hand steady despite the pounding of his heart. The moment the ink dried, Grasha pulled the steel armbands from her pack and fastened one around his wrist, then offered her own arm for him to do the same. The metal was cool and solid, a weight that felt like coming home. It is done, Nathaniel said, turning to the council. We are bound. The law recognizes our union, and there is nothing you can do to change it. For a long moment the square was utterly silent. Then someone in the crowd began to clap. It was Sarah, the widow who lived on the eastern edge of town, the one whose son had died in the border wars. The sound was slow and deliberate, and when others turned to stare at her in shock, she smiled sadly. Let them be, she said. My boy died fighting orcs, and I hated them for years. But I am tired of hating. I am tired of watching fear poison everything good. If they want to make a life together, let them try. A few others joined her applause, not many, but enough to show that not everyone in Millbrook was lost to prejudice. But more remained silent or actively hostile. Davison stood rigid with fury, his hands clenched on the table. You have made your choice, he said, his voice like ice. Now live with the consequences. This council will not trade with you, will not aid you, will not recognize any claims you make upon the town. You are cast out. I expected nothing less, Nathaniel replied. He took Grasha's hand, lacing their fingers together, the armbands on their wrists catching the morning light. But know this, we will not hide, we will not run. We will live our lives here, on my land, and we will show you by example that your fear is unfounded. We will be here when you finally decide to stop being afraid. They turned together and walked back to the cart, the crowd parting before them like water. Some faces were twisted with disgust, others showed confusion or pity or grudging respect, but Nathaniel looked at none of them. He looked only at Grasha, at the fierce pride and vulnerable hope in her expression, and he knew they had done the right thing. The ride home was quiet. When they reached the farm, Grasha pulled the cart to a stop and turned to him, her eyes searching his face. No regrets? She asked softly. Not one, he said, and kissed her. The isolation was harsh in the weeks that followed. Without access to the town's merchants, they had to be creative. Grasha hunted deer and rabbits, supplementing what the farm produced. Nathaniel traded wheat with travelers on the road, bartering for tools and supplies they could not make themselves. It was hard work and uncertain, but they managed. Then, on a cold morning 3 weeks after the signing, a wagon rolled up their path. It was Sarah the widow, her cart loaded with goods, salt, sugar, cloth, nails, a dozen necessities. "I will not stand by while you starve," she said bluntly when Nathaniel came out to meet her. "I have coin from my son's pension, and I choose to spend it how I like. The council can rot if they do not like it." Grasha emerged from the barn, wary but curious. Sarah looked her up and down, then nodded as if confirming something to herself. "You are the one who fixed the widow Carson's roof during that storm last week, are you not?" Sarah asked. Grasha blinked, surprised. "I was passing by. I saw it needed repair. Widow Carson is my sister," she told me. "Said an orc woman climbed up there in the rain and nailed down the shingles before the whole thing blew away." Sarah's expression softened. "You did not have to do that. She needed help." "Yes, she did." Sarah began unloading the wagon. "I will come by once a week. If you need something specific, leave a list. I will do what I can." It was a small crack in the wall of isolation, but it was something. And as autumn turned to winter, other cracks appeared. A farmer, whose child Grasha had pulled from a frozen pond, left a haunch of pork at their gate, with no note. The blacksmith, shamed by his own conscience, began accepting their trade orders again, though he left the finished goods outside his shop rather than face them directly. Not everyone softened. Davison and his supporters remained bitterly opposed, and there were still incident stones thrown at their windows, crude words painted on the barn. But there were also moments of unexpected kindness, a basket of apples from an anonymous donor, a wave from a child who did not yet understand that she was supposed to fear. Through it all, Nathaniel and Grasha built their life together. They repaired the farmhouse, adding a second room and a better chimney. They planted a larger garden, planning for the spring. They learned each other's languages, each other's songs, each other's dreams. On cold nights, they lay tangled together under thick quilts, talking until dawn about the family they hoped to build, the peace they hoped to see. Winter was hard. The ground froze solid, and the wind howled down from the mountains with teeth of ice. They burned through half their wood supply by midwinter and had to venture into the forest for more. Grasha taught Nathaniel how to track game in the snow, how to read the signs of weather in the clouds, how to move silently through the trees. He taught her to read and write in common, to keep accounting books, to play simple melodies on his mother's old flute. One night, deep in the coldest part of winter, Grasha woke him in the darkness with urgency in her voice. "Someone is outside," she whispered. He heard it then, the crunch of footsteps in the snow. Trying and failing to be quiet, they armed themselves and crept to the window. In the moonlight, they could see figures moving toward the barn. Not a mob, this time just two people, small and furtive. Nathaniel grabbed a lantern and went out, Grasha right behind him. When he raised the light, it illuminated two children huddled against the barn door, shivering violently. He recognized them, Emma and Thomas, siblings whose parents had died of illness the previous summer. They had been living with their uncle, a brutal man who drank too much and cared too little. "Please," Emma said, through chattering teeth. She could not be more than 12, her brother perhaps 8. "Please do not send us back," he said. He was going to sell us to the labor houses in the city. We ran. Grasha made a low sound of anger and immediately scooped up the younger child, who was nearly blue with cold. Inside now. They brought the children into the house, wrapped them in blankets, fed them warm broth and bread. Thomas fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted and finally safe. Emma stayed awake, watching them with wide, fearful eyes. "Will you really let us stay?" she asked quietly. Nathaniel knelt beside her. "As long as you need, but Emma, your uncle will come looking. There will be trouble." "I do not care. Anything is better than going back." Grasha sat down on the girl's other side. "Then you will stay, and when he comes, we will face him together." The uncle arrived 2 days later with the constable in tow, demanding the return of his property. Nathaniel met them at the door with his arms crossed. "They are children, not property," he said flatly, "and they stay here. The law says orphans go to their next of kin," the constable said wearily. He was a decent man, but bound by his duty. "I do not like it either, Everhart, but I cannot just let you keep them. Even if their next of kin beats them and was planning to sell them into indentured servitude." The uncle, a greasy man named Pike, snarled, What I do with my brother's whelps is my business. You have no right, I have every right to shelter children in danger, Nathaniel interrupted. And unless you can prove before the magistrate that you can provide a safe and suitable home, they are staying here. You? Pike laughed nastily. You and your orc whore are going to raise human children? That is rich. Grasha appeared in the doorway behind Nathaniel, Emma and Thomas clinging to her sides. Her expression was cold enough to freeze blood. Call me that again, she said softly, and see what happens. Pike took a step back despite himself. The constable sighed heavily. Look, he said, I will make a note that the children are in your care pending a hearing before the magistrate. That gives us 2 months. Pike, if you want them back, you had better prove you can take care of them. Everhart, same to you, otherwise the magistrate will decide. It was the best they could hope for. When they left, Emma burst into tears of relief, and even Thomas managed a wobbly smile. Over the following weeks, the children settled into life on the farm. They took to Grasha quickly, charmed by her strength and her patient teaching. She showed them how to care for the animals, how to identify edible plants, how to defend themselves. Nathaniel taught them reading and arithmetic, and together they all worked to keep the farm running through the brutal winter. Word spread through Millbrook about the children. Opinion was divided. Some thought it was an outrage that an orc was helping to raise human children. Others, particularly those who knew Pike's cruelty, quietly approved. Sarah visited more often, bringing small gifts for Emma and Thomas ribbons, a wooden toy horse, a warm scarf. You are doing a good thing, she told Grasha one afternoon while the children played in the snow. They are happy here, I can see it. They deserve happiness, Grasha replied simply. All children do, even orc children. Especially orc children. They get so little of it. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then, do you have children of your own? Back in the mountains? No. I left before bonding with anyone from my clan. They thought me too soft, too curious about the world beyond our borders. Grasha smiled slightly. Turns out they were right. Their loss, Sarah said firmly. You are exactly what this town needs, whether they know it or not. The magistrate's hearing came in early spring, when the first green shoots were pushing through the thawing earth. Nathaniel and Grasha dressed the children in their best clothes and rode into town with Sarah accompanying them for support. The hearing was held in the council building, with the regional magistrate, a shrewd woman named Constance Wells, presiding. Pike showed up drunk and belligerent. He could produce no evidence of income, no plan for the children's education or care, no character witnesses to speak on his behalf. When asked why he wanted the children back, he made the mistake of saying, "They are mine by right, and I will do with them as I please." Magistrate Wells's expression could have cut glass. Children are not chattel, Mr. Pike. Next argument. She turned to Nathaniel and Grasha. Mr. Everhart, you wish to take permanent guardianship of the children? We do, Your Honor. And you believe you can provide for them adequately. Educate them, prepare them for productive lives? We do. I have a profitable farm and sufficient resources. I was educated in reading, writing, mathematics, and medicine. Grasha has knowledge of survival skills, hunting, and practical crafts. Between us, we can give them everything they need. Wells's gaze moved to Grasha. You are the orc who entered a blood pact with Mr. Everhart, correct? I am. And you wish to help raise these human children? I do. They came to us seeking safety. We gave it. Now they are ours to protect, if you allow it. Wells studied them both for a long moment, then looked at Emma and Thomas. Children, approach. They stepped forward, holding hands. Wells's expression softened slightly. Emma, Thomas, do you wish to stay with Mr. Everhart and Grasha? Yes, madam, Emma said immediately. Thomas nodded vigorously. Are they kind to you? They are the best, Thomas said, his voice small but certain. Grasha tells the best stories, and Nathaniel is teaching me to read. They never hit us or yell. They make sure we are warm and fed. Please do not make us go back to Uncle Pike. Wells nodded slowly. Very well, I see no reason to deny this petition. Guardianship is granted to Nathaniel Everhart and Grasha of the Northern Peaks, jointly, until the children reach majority or circumstances change significantly. Mr. Pike, you are ordered to stay away from the children and the Everhart property. This hearing is concluded. Pike stormed out, cursing, but no one cared. Emma and Thomas clung to Grasha and Nathaniel, crying with happiness, and even Wells managed a small smile. "Take care of them," she said quietly to Nathaniel as they prepared to leave, "and take care of each other. What you are building here, it matters, more than you know." They returned to the farm as a family. That night, they celebrated with a special dinner, roasted chicken, fresh bread, precious sugar pastries that Sarah had brought. The children were giddy with relief and joy, and even Grasha, usually so composed, had tears in her eyes. After the children were asleep, Nathaniel and Grasha sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder and his arm around her waist. "We have children now," he said wonderingly. "We are parents. Terrifying, is it not?" "Absolutely." He kissed her hair. "I would not change a thing." Spring brought new life to the farm. They planted twice as large a garden to feed their growing family. Emma proved to have a gift for working with plants, coaxing vegetables to grow with patient care. Thomas loved the animals and spent hours in the barn, grooming the horse and talking to the chickens as if they could understand him. Grasha taught them to use a bow, much to Nathaniel's amused resignation, and he taught them to cook without burning down the kitchen. Slowly, incredibly, the town began to change. It started small, a nod from someone in passing, a fair price at the market, an invitation to a barn raising that was not immediately rescinded when they showed up. The children helped. It was hard to maintain prejudice when Emma and Thomas so clearly thrived under Grasha's care. Seeing her gentle patience with them, her fierce protectiveness, her obvious love, made it difficult to see her as a monster. One afternoon, a delegation of 3 women appeared at the farm. Nathaniel recognized them as wives of farmers from the surrounding area. They approached hesitantly, clearly nervous, while Grasha watched them from the porch with guarded curiosity. The eldest, a woman named Martha, spoke first. "We have come to ask a favor. My daughter is with child, her first, and she is having a difficult time. We heard, that is, we were told that orc midwives have great skill. We wondered if you might." She trailed off, embarrassed and uncertain. Grasha was silent for a long moment, then nodded. "I will come. When does she need me? Could you come now? She has been laboring since yesterday dawn. We are worried." Grasha grabbed her medicine bag, the one Nathaniel had helped her assemble over the winter, and left immediately. Nathaniel watched her go with a mixture of pride and anxiety. This could go either way. She returned 12 hours later, exhausted but smiling. "A girl," she reported, "healthy and loud. The mother will recover well." Word spread. When the next difficult birth occurred, they sent for Grasha again. And the next. Her knowledge of herbs and healing, combined with her practical experience, made her invaluable. She never refused a call for help, no matter how late or how far. Gradually, grudgingly, people began to respect her. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and golden light. The farm prospered, the wheat grew tall, the garden overflowed with vegetables, and the children grew brown and strong from days spent working and playing in the sun. Nathaniel looked around at everything they had built, the repaired house, the full larder, the family they had created, and felt a contentment so deep it almost frightened him. Then, one evening in late summer, a stranger appeared on the road. He was orc, tall and powerfully built, with scars marking his arms and face. He stopped at the edge of the property and called out in Orcish. Grasha froze when she heard the voice. Then, slowly, she walked out to meet him. Nathaniel followed, protective instinct making him stay close. Emma and Thomas watched from the porch, curious and a little afraid. The stranger and Grasha spoke in rapid Orcish, too fast for Nathaniel to follow with his limited grasp of the language. But he could read their body language, the stranger's stern disapproval, Grasha's defensive posture, the tension crackling between them. Finally, Grasha turned to Nathaniel. "This is Korgoth," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "My father." Nathaniel's stomach dropped. He looked at the older orc with new eyes, seeing the resemblance in the set of their jaws, the shape of their eyes. Korgoth stared back at him with undisguised hostility. "Father," Grasha said, switching to common, "this is Nathaniel, my bondmate, and those are Emma and Thomas, the children we are raising." Korgoth's expression did not soften. "I came because word reached the mountains that my daughter had bound herself to a human. I did not believe it. Now I see it is true." He looked Nathaniel up and down with contempt. "You are weak, soft. You will get her killed." "With respect," Nathaniel said evenly. "Grasha is the strongest person I have ever met. He does not need me to protect her. We protect each other." Foolish words. Humans and orcs do not mix. This will end in blood and sorrow. Grasha stepped between them, her voice hard. Enough. Nathaniel is my choice, my bondmate, my love. I am happy here. I am building a life. If you cannot accept that, then you should leave. Korgoth's expression flickered, hurt beneath the anger. Your mother sent me to bring you home. She worries. Tell her I am home. This is my home now. Father and daughter stared at each other, a lifetime of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Korgoth sighed, and some of the stiffness left his shoulders. I cannot force you to return. I can only warn you that this path is dangerous. The clan will not accept a human. You will be exile in truth. I know, I accept that. Korgoth turned to go, then paused. He looked at Nathaniel again, and this time there was something other than hostility in his eyes, perhaps the faintest trace of respect. Take care of her, he said gruffly, or I will return and it will not be to talk. I will guard her with my life, Nathaniel promised. Korgoth nodded once, then walked away into the gathering dusk. Grasha watched him go, her face unreadable. When he finally disappeared from view, she let out a shaky breath. Well, she said, that went better than expected. Your father just threatened to kill me. Yes. But he did not actually try. For him, that is practically a warm welcome. Nathaniel pulled her close and she leaned into him, her strength momentarily flagging. Are you all right? He asked softly. I am sad, she admitted, but not surprised. I knew when I chose this that I was choosing to leave my old life behind. It does not make it easy, but it does not make it wrong. They stood together in the twilight, holding each other, and Nathaniel sent a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening that they would have the strength to weather whatever came next. Autumn arrived again, marking a full year since they had signed the blood pact. To celebrate, they decided to host a harvest festival on the farm, a small gathering for those who had shown them kindness. Sarah came, and Widow Carson, and the families whose children or wives Grasha had helped. Even Constable Reed showed up, looking slightly embarrassed but determined to be friendly. They set up tables in the yard, loaded with food and drink. Grasha made dishes from her homeland, spiced meat pies, and a dark bread that was surprisingly sweet. Nathaniel contributed his mother's recipe for apple cider and roasted vegetables from their garden. The children ran wild, playing games with the other youngsters who had come, and for a few hours it felt like they were just another family celebrating the season. As the sun set, Nathaniel stood to make a toast. The gathered crowd quieted, faces turned toward him in the flickering firelight. A year ago, he said, I stood in the town square and made a choice that many of you thought was madness. I chose love over law, hope over fear. I chose Grasha. He looked at her, sitting beside him with the firelight painting her skin in warm tones. It has not been easy. We have faced prejudice and isolation and outright hostility, but we have also found unexpected friendship, genuine community, and a happiness I never thought possible. So I want to thank all of you who are here tonight. Thank you for seeing past fear to the people we are. Thank you for giving us a chance. And thank you for proving that change is possible, even in the most unlikely places. Grasha stood and took his hand. I came to this land wounded and alone, she said, her voice carrying clear and strong. I expected to die. Instead, I found life a life richer and fuller than any I had imagined. I found a partner who sees me as I am and loves me anyway. I found children to nurture and protect. I found neighbors who are becoming friends. I am grateful beyond words. Zu Grashukdor, I love you all. There were tears in more than a few eyes. Sarah raised her glass to Nathaniel and Grasha, to love that breaks boundaries, to the future. To the future, the crowd echoed, and they drank together under the stars. Later, when the guests had gone and the children were asleep, Nathaniel and Grasha walked out to the edge of the wheat field. The stalks whispered in the night breeze and the moon hung full and bright overhead. Grasha leaned against him, and he wrapped his arms around her, still marveling that she was his, that they had built this impossible life together. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Giving up your place in the town, the easy life you could have had? Never, not once. He turned her to face him. You are my place. Wherever you are is where I belong. She kissed him, deep and slow, and when they pulled apart, she was smiling. I have news, she said. I have been waiting for the right moment to tell you. What news? I am with child, our child, due in the spring. For a moment he could not speak, Joy and terror and wonder crashed through him in equal measure. A baby, he finally managed. We are going to have a baby. Yes, half orc, half human, something entirely new. Her hand moved to her still flat stomach. Are you afraid? Terrified, he admitted, and happier than I have ever been. They held each other in the moonlight, two people from different worlds who had chosen to create something new. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be more challenges, more prejudice, more obstacles to overcome. But they would face it together, bonded by love and law and the unshakable belief that what they were building mattered. Winter came again, and Grasha's belly grew. She remained active and strong throughout the pregnancy, much to Nathaniel's anxious concern, but she refused to be coddled. Emma and Thomas were beside themselves with excitement at the prospect of a baby, already arguing over names and fighting over who would get to hold the infant first. The birth came on a warm day in early spring, during a rain shower that turned the world soft and green. Sarah attended as midwife, having learned much from watching Grasha work, and the labor was long but without complications. When the baby finally arrived, squalling and healthy, Nathaniel wept at the sight of his daughter. She had her mother's green skin, softer than Grasha's but unmistakably orcish. She had her father's dark hair and his nose. Her ears were slightly pointed, her build sturdy and strong. She was beautiful and strange and perfect. What shall we name her? Grasha asked. Cradling the baby against her chest, Nathaniel thought of his mother, who had always believed in kindness and second chances. Naomi, if you like it. Grasha smiled. Naomi, yes, it suits her. Word of the baby's birth spread quickly. Some in the town reacted with disgust or fear. A half-breed child, they called her, an abomination. But others were curious, and a few were genuinely pleased. The children especially were fascinated, begging their parents to let them come see the baby. Magistrate Wells sent a letter of congratulations and a gift, a beautifully carved cradle with blessings from multiple faiths inscribed along the sides. Sarah brought a stack of soft blankets and a rocking chair she had made herself. Even Constable Reed stopped by with a shy offering of a stuffed toy horse. But the most surprising visitor came 2 weeks after the birth. Councilman Davison appeared at the door, alone, looking older and wearier than Nathaniel remembered. Grasha answered the door with Naomi in her arms, and for a long moment Davison simply stared at the baby. May I come in? He asked quietly. They let him in, wary but willing to listen. He sat at the kitchen table, his hands folded, and did not speak for a long time. Finally, he looked up at Nathaniel. I came to apologize, he said. I have spent 2 years fighting you, trying to drive you out, convince myself that you were wrong. But my granddaughter fell ill last month. Fever. The doctor had given up hope. My daughter brought her to Grasha in desperation, and Grasha healed her, saved her life. His voice cracked slightly. I have been a fool. Grasha sat down across from him, still holding the baby. Your granddaughter is well? She is, thanks to you. Davison looked at Naomi, and his expression was complex grief and shame and fragile hope. She is beautiful, your daughter. Thank you. I cannot undo the harm I have caused you. I cannot take back the words I said or the votes I cast, but I can stop fighting you. I can start supporting you, if you will let me. Nathaniel exchanged a look with Grasha, and in her eyes he saw the same mix of caution and compassion that he felt. They had every right to turn Davison away, to refuse his apology. But bitterness had never been their way. We would be glad to have your support, Nathaniel said carefully. And your friendship, if you offer it. Davison nodded, his relief palpable. I offer it, and I will do what I can to change minds on the council. It will take time, but I am a stubborn old man. I can be persuasive when I choose. He was true to his word. Over the following months, Davison became an unlikely ally, using his influence to chip away at the laws and customs that had made life difficult for Nathaniel and Grasha. He could not change everything overnight, but he made progress. Trade restrictions eased, official harassment stopped. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to accept that the Everhart family was there to stay. By the time Naomi took her first steps, tottering across the farmhouse floor into her mother's waiting arms, the atmosphere in Millbrook had shifted noticeably. There were still holdouts, still people who would never accept an orc among them, but they were in the minority now. Most people had seen Grasha's tireless work as a healer, her dedication to her family, her contributions to the community, and found it impossible to maintain their prejudice in the face of such evidence. Emma turned 15 and announced that she wanted to become a healer like Grasha. Thomas, now 11, had developed a talent for working with horses and dreamed of raising them. They were good children, growing into good people, and Nathaniel felt a fierce pride every time he looked at them. On a golden afternoon in late summer, 2 years after Naomi's birth, the entire town gathered for a very different ceremony than the one that had occurred in the square years before. This time, it was a celebration, the dedication of a new community healing house, funded by donations from across the region and built by volunteers from Millbrook and beyond. Grasha had been asked to serve as the primary healer, with 2 apprentices to assist her, one of them Emma. The building stood on the edge of town, a sturdy structure of stone and wood, with windows that let in plenty of light. Inside were beds for patients, shelves for medicines, a workspace for preparing remedies, and a small library of medical texts that Nathaniel had painstakingly collected. Magistrate Wells presided over the dedication ceremony, and when she called Grasha forward to cut the ceremonial ribbon, the crowd erupted in genuine applause. Grasha stood there with Naomi in one arm and the scissors in the other hand, and she looked out at the sea of faces, human and, increasingly, orc, as others from the mountains began to cautiously visit this strange place where the old boundaries were dissolving. "I came to Millbrook by accident," Grasha said, her voice strong and clear. "I stayed because of love. I have built a life here beyond anything I imagined possible. This healing house represents everything we have learned together, that fear can be overcome, that prejudice can be unlearned, that people from different worlds can work together to create something beautiful. I am honored to serve this community, and I pledge to use my skills to heal anyone who comes through these doors, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." More applause, and this time even Davison was clapping, his old face creased with a genuine smile. Nathaniel stood to the side with Emma and Thomas, his heart so full it ached. This was what they had fought for, not just acceptance for themselves, but a genuine shift in how people saw each other. A crack in the wall that separated human from orc, that kept everyone afraid and alone. That evening, they returned to the farm for a family dinner. The table was crowded now, Nathaniel and Grasha, Emma and Thomas, little Naomi in her high chair, and Sarah, who had become an honorary grandmother to them all. They ate and laughed and told stories, and when Naomi started fussing, Thomas jumped up to entertain her with silly faces, while Emma cleared the dishes without being asked. After the children were in bed, Nathaniel and Grasha sat on the porch as they had countless times before, the farm spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous in the moonlight. Grasha leaned her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, breathing in the scent of her hair. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked softly. "I remember thinking you were either the kindest man alive or the stupidest. Have you decided which yet?" "Both. Definitely both." She tilted her face up to kiss him, "and I love you for it." "Zugrashukdor," he murmured against her lips. "Zugrashukdor." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. In the distance, an owl called, and somewhere in the house, one of the children laughed in their sleep. It was an ordinary moment, quiet and unremarkable, and it was everything. 3 more years passed, marked by small joys and minor challenges. Naomi grew into a precocious child with her mother's strength and her father's curiosity. Emma completed her apprenticeship and began practicing as a healer in her own right, her gentle touch and patient manner making her beloved among the townspeople. Thomas started a horse breeding program that quickly gained a reputation for producing excellent animals. And Nathaniel and Grasha simply continued to live their lives, farming, healing, raising their family, and proving day by day that love could indeed bridge any divide. The farm expanded. They bought the neighboring plot when old Farmer Jenkins retired, doubling their land. They built a larger barn, a second house, for when the children grew old enough to need their own space, a workshop for Thomas's horse training. The place hummed with life and activity, and travelers passing through often stopped to marvel at the prosperous homestead run by a human orc family. Other mixed couples began to appear, emboldened by Nathaniel and Grasha's example. An orc craftsman married a human weaver in the next town over. A human soldier took an orc wife after serving together in a border patrol, that had shifted from conflict to cooperation. Each union faced challenges, but they also had Nathaniel and Grasha to look to as proof that it could work, that the love was worth the struggle. On the 5th anniversary of the Blood Pact signing, the town threw a festival in their honor. It was Davison's idea, and though Nathaniel and Grasha protested that it was unnecessary, the preparations went forward anyway. The entire square was decorated with ribbons and flowers, tables loaded with food, musicians hired to play. It was a far cry from the hostile crowd that had witnessed their original declaration. When the evening's festivities reached their peak, Davison called for silence and stood on the platform that had been erected for speeches. He looked older now, his beard gone completely white, but his voice was still strong. 5 years ago, he said, 2 people stood in this square and made a choice that terrified me. They chose each other across a divide I thought was absolute. They chose love over law, hope over tradition, and in doing so, they changed everything. I fought them. I tried to drive them away. I was wrong. He paused, emotion thick in his voice. Nathaniel and Grasha Everhart have given this town a gift beyond measure. They have shown us that the barriers we build are of our own making, and that they can be torn down if we are brave enough to try. They have healed our sick, raised our children, and enriched our community in ways we are still discovering. So tonight, we honor them not as outsiders who forced their way in, but as beloved members of our community who made us better simply by being themselves. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Grasha looked overwhelmed, her eyes bright with tears she refused to let fall. Nathaniel took her hand and stood, drawing her up with him. Together, they faced the crowd that had once rejected them and now celebrated them. "Thank you," Nathaniel said, his voice carrying across the square. "We did not set out to change the world. We only wanted to be together. But if our love has made even a small difference, if it has helped even one person see past their fear to the person standing before them, then every hardship was worth it." Grasha cleared her throat, blinking rapidly. "I was dying when I came here. Nathaniel saved my life, but more than that, he gave me a reason to live. He gave me a home, a family, a future I never thought possible. The law said no human could wed an orc, but he signed the pact anyway, with the whole town watching. And in doing so, he freed us both." She looked at Nathaniel, and in her eyes was the same fierce love that had sustained them through every trial. "Zugrashuk, door, always, always," he echoed, and kissed her to the roaring approval of the crowd. The festival continued long into the night, but eventually Nathaniel and Grasha slipped away, heading home with their sleeping daughter cradled between them and Emma and Thomas, following close behind. As they walked the familiar path under the stars, Grasha leaned against Nathaniel's side. "Do you think it will last?" she asked quietly. "The peace, the acceptance?" "I think it will be challenged," he said honestly. "There will always be people who fear what is different. But I also think we have built something strong enough to endure. We have shown them a different way. And people, when given the choice, often choose hope over hate. Optimist, realist. I have seen what we have built. I have faith in it." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "Then I will have faith too." They reached the farm, and home welcomed them with warm lamplight and familiar walls. Emma took Naomi up to bed while Thomas went to check on the horses one last time. Nathaniel and Grasha stood in the doorway, looking out at the land they had made together, every field, every growing thing a testament to their stubborn love. 5 years, Grasha mused. "It feels like both forever and no time at all. Here is to 50 more," Nathaniel said, pulling her close, "and 50 after that." They went inside together, closing the door on the night and the world, secure in the life they had built and the love that sustained it. The law had said no human could wed an orc, but they had signed the pact anyway with the whole town watching, and in doing so, they had not just changed their own lives, they had changed the world, one person one day, one act of love at a time. The years flowed forward like water, each bringing new challenges and new joys. Naomi started school and quickly became a bridge between human and orc children, her dual heritage making her uniquely positioned to understand and translate between both cultures. Emma married a young doctor from the next town, a kind man who admired her skill and supported her work. Thomas fell in love with an orc girl who came to buy horses and ended up staying for the horsemen, and their wedding was attended by half the county. Nathaniel's hair went gray at the temples, and Grasha's green skin took on the faint creases of age, but their love only deepened with time. They woke each morning in the bed they had shared for years, the farmhouse creaking comfortably around them, and began each day with quiet gratitude for the life they had built. The healing house thrived under Grasha's leadership, becoming a center not just for medical care, but for community gathering. She trained a dozen apprentices over the years, both human and orc, passing on her knowledge with patience and care. Nathaniel continued to farm, to read, to tinker with new ideas for improving crop yields and irrigation. Together, they watched their family grow. Grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and laughter, and each one was raised with the understanding that love knew no boundaries, that family was chosen as much as born, that the world was wider and more welcoming than their ancestors had believed. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the spot where Grasha had first collapsed in Nathaniel's field. He had marked it years ago with a simple stone, carved with the date and a symbol that combined orcish and human traditions. They stood there hand in hand, the wheat rustling around them, and reflected on everything that had changed. "I was so afraid that day," Grasha admitted, "afraid of dying, afraid of what would happen if I survived. I never imagined this." "I was afraid too," Nathaniel said, "afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of losing you, afraid of standing alone." He lifted her hand and kissed the knuckles worn from years of work and healing. "But I would make the same choice 1,000 times over. You are the best decision I ever made, and you are mine." They kissed, surrounded by the golden wheat and the wide blue sky, two people who had defied the law and the odds and every expectation to build something beautiful. The town that had once rejected them now called them heroes. The laws that had tried to keep them apart had been changed, erased, rewritten to acknowledge that love between species was not just possible, but worth protecting. But none of that mattered as much as this moment, this quiet communion between two souls who had chosen each other against all reason and found that reason was overrated compared to love. They walked back to the house together, to the family and life waiting for them. Children and grandchildren spilled out the door to greet them, a chaotic blend of green and pale skin, tusks and smooth teeth, human and orc and everything in between. It was loud and messy and perfect. That night, after everyone else had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Grasha sat on their porch one last time, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and constant, and the farm spread out before them in peaceful darkness. "Do you have any regrets?" Grasha asked, the question she had posed so many times over the years. "Not one," Nathaniel answered, as he always did. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner." He pulled her closer, and they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of their land. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Closer, in the barn, the horses shifted and settled. Inside the house, a grandchild cried briefly before being soothed back to sleep. It was an ordinary night in an extraordinary life, and Nathaniel felt the weight of every choice that had led them here, every risk taken, every fear faced, every moment of doubt overcome by love. The law had said no human could wed an orc. He had signed the pact anyway, with the whole town watching, and in doing so, he had not just claimed his own happiness, he had helped create a future where such laws seemed absurd, where love between any two people was celebrated rather than condemned, where the boundaries that had once seemed absolute had dissolved into nothing more than ancient history. "I love you," he said into the darkness, the words as essential as breathing. "I love you," Grasha replied, her voice warm and certain. "Always and forever, my stubborn, human, always and forever, my fierce, brilliant orc." They sat together as the stars turned overhead, two people who had defied the world to be together, and in their togetherness had changed that world for the better. The law had been wrong, love had been right, and that, in the end, was all that mattered. The night deepened, and eventually, they went inside to the warmth and comfort of their home. But the legacy of their choice would continue long after they were gone, in their children and grandchildren, in the laws that had been rewritten, in the hearts and minds they had changed, in every person who looked at someone different and chose to see a person rather than a monster. They had proven that love could cross any divide, that courage could overcome any obstacle, that two people willing to stand together could move the world. And so they lived out their days, in peace and joy and love, a testament to the power of choosing hope over fear, compassion over prejudice, and love over law. Their story became legend in Millbrook and beyond the human who wed an orc, the couple who changed everything. But to them, it was simply their life, the one they had built together from nothing more than kindness and courage and love that refused to be denied. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.